to know what drives my partner Ryan insane? And I'm talking about insane. I'm talking like relationship impacting towards me when I talk to you guys and I don't have a point. If I ever talk to you guys about something, when it gets done, he'll go, "What was that about?" And I have to be able to tell him in a sentence. And if I can't, he'll just scratch his head and go, "Then why did you do it?" It's like, well, Ryan, sometimes I have a 10-second thought. And I feel like it's an impactful thought. Let me give you guys a great example. Many, many years ago, before any of you were born, the Supreme Court got together to decide what was offensive, right? Because you have the freedom of speech within America. And then speech isn't just words. It gets moved over to expression. It gets the other forms of art. Mixed martial arts actually got brought into this, believe it or not. But this is how wide the scope is. And the Supreme Court says it'll be offensive. We'll know it when we see it. They couldn't define it. And as problematic as that is for the greatest branch in government to not be able to explain beyond we'll know it when we see it, it also, you get it, right? Like it makes a level of sense. And one thing about rules is they have to be easily identifiable and they have to be enforceable. So let me give you a great one. What's the line in MMA? Because of the last press conference prior to UFC 296, a number of people for the first time ever said that the line was crossed. And it's a very tricky one that brings me back to the Supreme Court's rule of offensive. We'll know it when we see it, because what part of it and what part of what we saw crossed the line? I mean, on one hand, and on one day, you had the Strickland and Duplessis situation, what was so wildly sensitive that I'm not going to go into any more detail about it than to tell you the Duplessis versus Strickland situation, which ultimately was the genesis for what turned in to an illegal street fight, of which everybody understood because the genesis was so strong. Okay. Somewhere within there, you had the Ian Gary and the WAG situation. And that even seemed to take precedence, though Ian Gary was not present at a press conference and was replaced only, and according to some, about 50% with Colby, Leon, the club, and father situation, right? It was one of these really peculiar spots. What you're not allowed to talk about. You're not allowed to talk about somebody's father. You're not allowed to talk about their wives. You're not allowed to talk about their children. I mean, you can go in any which direction that you want, and I can't extend that. I already know I'm going to drive Ryan crazy, but let me take you back to the last presidential debate, may I? And stay with me on this. I mean, right, if we're tying it all the way into the Supreme Court, it does have a relevance. At the last presidential debate, Nikki Haley, who is for sale, told the world when Vivek Ramaswamy came after her. Do you guys understand what this is about? Nikki Haley doesn't believe that people should be on TikTok because TikTok is an arm of the Chinese government. And Vivek Ramaswamy is going, you know what? It's a great mechanism to talk to an entire demographic known as younger people and the next generation who you've alienated, Nikki, but not everybody in your family has because your daughter is on TikTok. So now he has brought up Nikki's daughter, right? And as soon as he said, I could even cringe inside. I was like, oh, I know what he was going for, but he missed. And so Nikki fired back to let him know, you do not speak about children. And for the most part, you guys like to agree with that. For the most part of the Vivek, hey, your daughter's on TikTok versus Nikki, don't talk about my child. Most of you side with Nikki, but how? I mean, Nikki's putting down Vivek in the moment that she's defending her daughter. Vivek is somebody's child. So what do you mean don't talk about somebody's child? Vivek's mother is in the audience. So now you're talking about Vivek's. It's a very weird thing. And 5 minutes before that, Nikki, you spent your entire time talking about Hunter Biden, who is not your opponent. He is the child of a perceived political opponent. So how can you say don't talk about children? You're talking about my mom's child right now, and you spent the rest of the time talking about the Democrats' leading man's child. And you see where it becomes different? Do you see where it becomes a situation of I'll know it when I see it? Because it's very tough in MMA. I mean, for the first time ever, after the UFC 296 press conferences and subsequent fist fight where Gilbert Burns' children were given a heads up, My old partner, Errol Hawani, for the first time ever, talked about having a level of sanctioning, a fine process, a suspension process, a removal process, something worse. And you're kind of looking around and just going, but this is a really tough one. How do we identify that and how is that enforceable? AJ Ferrari over the weekend was in trouble for slapping an opponent. And everybody thinks, oh, this is just so obvious. There is no slapping. Slapping, pushing, and pulling is 100% what wrestling is. So no, it's not that obvious. I don't agree with you at all. And if it's within the time of the match, then what rules is it that you're enforcing? A referee is not a dictator that just has full authority. It must be within the time of a match. And besides, you're telling me that this is illegal? That's how people shake hands. They slap hands. What if AJ Ferrari thought the guy was on fire and he was going to pat him out? I mean, not for nothing. If you're going to have a rule that you're going to write down, it has to be identifiable before it can be enforceable. So what is out of bounds? What is off limits? How far is too far? How would you ever know if you didn't get there? I mean, I'm not quite ready for this to be done. And there's never been a time when we've revisited a press conference that happened 3 weeks ago. But that press conference of 3 weeks ago led to an illegal street fight, which is about to be a legal sanctioned cage fight for the championship of the world. Like, they all tie in. So then you start to wonder, well, how far is too far? They asked du Plessis about this, and du Plessis actually said, you know what? I didn't know I was going to get that reaction from him. Du Plessis said that himself. He goes, I was actually a little surprised how much that triggered him. And it was one of these candid moments, and I appreciate it from du Plessis, and it did piss Strickland off, straight up. No two ways around it. And Sean's not even trying to hide it. You want to get me hot under the collar? You just did. It was a very interesting moment, but how would we know that that was too far? Is that too far for everybody, or was that too far just in that one unique situation? And what part about it was too far, and what part about it are you talking about? Somebody's childhood, or somebody's father, or somebody's parent, or something that's off limits? How would that be any different than when Nikki Haley is going after Vivek, and Vivek is somebody's child? See where it starts to get tough? Nikki Haley standing on stage while for sale telling the world, you don't talk about children, and 1 minute later talking about Joe Biden's son and a laptop. And Joe Biden's son is not on the ballot. He is the son. He is the child of somebody on the ballot. I'm just asking you, what is the difference? And when you answer that, how do you know? How would you know if you've gone too far? I mean, what in the hell is wrong with that in the first place? I mean, that's always one of the really weird things. This is too far. Okay, what does that mean? Now that you've established we've gone too far, what does that mean? And is that a negative? I would like to know what too far is, because then I would go there every single day. In everything I do, I don't believe in moderation. Some of you do. I believe if anything's worth doing, it's worth overdoing. I believe in excess. I live a life of excess. I would never do something unless I was going to do a whole effing bunch of it. I don't believe in it. So what is too far? How do we get there? How do you know? And why is it a negative? I think that it's very difficult to identify. And I remember a time in the sport when the whole world was going around and they were all apologizing for the sport. We had politicians calling it human cockfighting. We had politicians saying it was barbaric. And I had a very big voice at that time. They brought me in to deal with these politicians. And everybody said, this is barbaric and it's human cockfighting, or they said it's not. There was no in between until Chael came along. And I said it is absolutely barbaric and it is absolutely human cockfighting. If you're taking two half-naked men, you're having them fist fight under extremely limited rules in a steel cage for nothing more than a few dollars and the applause of a drunken audience. If that's not barbaric, I don't know what is. But I don't apologize for it. The end. And as soon as I started speaking that way, you saw the whole rest of our community stop apologizing for it. So please tell me what is too far, and then tell me why, if it's too far, if you've accurately identified it, why would that be a bad thing?